When we think of Iloilo today, what comes to mind? Maybe it's the gentle flow of the Iloilo River, lined with beautiful esplanades where families stroll in the late afternoon. Or perhaps it's the grandeur of old mansions in Jaro, their intricate designs whispering tales of a glorious past. We imagine the vibrant Dinagyang festival, with its thunderous drums and colorful warriors dancing in the streets. We taste the comforting warmth of a bowl of La Paz Bachoy, a flavor that really feels like home. Iloilo is often called the Queen City of the South, a title that brings to mind images of grace, prosperity, and beauty. It's a city that seems to wear its crown with effortless elegance, a true jewel of the Visayas. But what if I told you that behind every glittering jewel in that crown lies a story? And honestly, not all of these stories are happy ones. Beyond the festive atmosphere and the picturesque landscapes, there is a different Iloilo. It is a city built on foundations that are far more complex, and at times much darker than the postcards suggest. Imagine peeling back the layers of a beautiful painting to find a hidden sketch underneath, a sketch filled with struggle, sacrifice, and sorrow. The story of Iloilo's rise to prominence is not just about progress and wealth, it is also about loss and exploitation. It's a history that many have forgotten, but one that continues to shape the city to this day. This is the side of Iloilo we rarely talk about. It's the story of the hands that toiled under the sweltering sun in the vast sugarcane fields, their sweat watering the very soil that made the sugar barons rich. It's the story of skilled weavers whose looms fell silent, their ancient craft replaced by cheap foreign textiles. It's the story of revolutionaries who fought for freedom, only to be betrayed by new masters. This is the history hidden in the shadows of the magnificent heritage houses, and behind the sweet taste of the sugar that once fueled an empire. The crown of the Queen City is heavier than it looks, for it is weighed down by the forgotten struggles of its people. So let us embark on a journey together. Let's step back in time, beyond the familiar sights and sounds of modern Iloilo. We will uncover the untold stories, the difficult truths, and the dark secrets behind its royal title. Why is it important to know this? Because understanding the full story, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the tragedies, allows us to appreciate the true spirit of Iloilo and its people. It helps us understand that the city's strength was not just built on wealth, but forged in the fires of hardship. And in knowing this, we can honor the past while building a more conscious and compassionate future. Let's travel back to the year 1896. The Philippine Revolution against Spain was exploding across Luzon. Andres Bonifacio and the Katipunan had raised the cry for freedom, and the struggle for independence had begun. But here in Iloilo, the situation was quite different. The city was a bastion of Spanish power, a loyal subject of the Spanish crown. In fact, it was in this very year that Queen Regent Maria Cristina of Spain bestowed upon Iloilo the title La Muy Leal y Noble Ciudad, which means the most loyal and noble city. This was a reward for the city's unwavering loyalty and its contributions to the Spanish Empire. Imagine a young Ilonggo from a prominent family at that time. He might have felt a sense of pride. His city was being recognized by the Queen of Spain herself. The streets of Iloilo were bustling with commerce, the port was filled with ships from all over the world, and the elite lived in grand houses, enjoying the fruits of the sugar trade. From his perspective, loyalty to Spain seemed to have paid off handsomely. The city was prosperous, peaceful, and honored. Why would anyone want to disrupt this comfortable arrangement? The revolution happening in the north might have felt like a distant storm, a foolish rebellion that threatened the stability they enjoyed. But now let's imagine another Ilonggo from the same year. This time, a worker, maybe a stevedore at the port or a weaver whose family business was struggling. For him, the city's loyalty might have felt very different. He would see the immense wealth being loaded onto foreign ships, wealth that came from the land his ancestors had worked, yet he remained poor. He might hear whispers of the Katipunan's fight for freedom and feel a spark of hope. Was this loyalty to Spain truly for the benefit of all Ilonggos, or was it just for the wealthy few who profited from the colonial system? The royal title for him might not have been a badge of honor, but a golden chain. This contrast from 1896 forces us to ask a difficult question. How did Iloilo earn its crown? Was it a gift freely given, or was it a strategic tool used by a colonial power to maintain control? Was the city's prosperity a sign of genuine progress for all, or was it built on a system that exploited the many for the benefit of a few? The title Queen City of the South sounds glamorous, but its origins are tied to a complex web of power, money, and loyalty during one of the most turbulent times in our nation's history. The answer is not simple, and it reveals the first dark secret behind Iloilo's celebrated status. The story of Iloilo's wealth in the 19th century is, in many ways, the story of sugar. Before this time, sugar was just one of many crops grown in the region. But everything changed in 1855 when the port of Iloilo was opened to international trade. Suddenly, ships from Great Britain, America, and China could sail directly into the city. A British vice-consul named Nicholas Loney arrived and saw a golden opportunity. He saw the fertile plains of Iloilo and neighboring Negroes and imagined them covered in a sea of sugarcane. He offered loans to local landowners, making it easy for them to acquire modern sugar milling machinery from England. This was the beginning of the sugar boom. With British capital and technology, the haciendas or large sugar plantations flourished. The local elite, the hacenderos, became incredibly wealthy. They built magnificent mansions, sent their children to study in Europe, and lived a lifestyle of unbelievable luxury. Iloilo transformed into a bustling cosmopolitan center, second only to Manila. The river was dredged to accommodate larger ships, and warehouses lined the port to store the mountains of sugar waiting for export. The city was thriving, and its economy was booming. On the surface, it was a picture of incredible success, a testament to the profitable partnership between local elites and foreign traders. But this sweet success had a bitter, hidden cost. The vast sugarcane fields needed an enormous amount of labor. To meet this demand, a system of exploitation emerged. Poor families from neighboring provinces like Antique and Capiz were recruited to work as cicadas, or seasonal laborers. They were often trapped by deceptive contracts and low wages, forced to live in squalid conditions in the haciendas. They worked from sunrise to sunset under the scorching sun, cutting the tough sugarcane stalks with their bare hands. Even children were not spared. They were forced to work alongside their parents, their small bodies doing the work of adults, their childhood stolen by the relentless demand for sugar. This was the dark secret behind the sugar boom. The beautiful mansions of Jaro and Molo were built on the backs of these exploited workers. The lavish parties and European tours of the sugar barons were funded by the sweat and tears of thousands of impoverished families. While Iloilo was being hailed as a queen city, a vast population within its economic sphere was living in conditions of near slavery. The same system that created immense wealth for a few also created deep and lasting poverty for many. The sugar that made Iloilo famous was stained with the suffering of its people. Long before sugar dominated its fields, Iloilo was famous for something else: its textiles. For generations, the hands of Ilonggo weavers, mostly women, had created intricate and beautiful fabrics. Products like siname, made from abaca fiber, and juicy, woven from silk, were renowned throughout the archipelago and even beyond. Weaving was more than just a livelihood. It was a proud tradition, a form of artistic expression passed down from mothers to daughters. In towns like Miagao, Jaro, and Molo, the rhythmic sound of the loom was the heartbeat of the community. These textiles were so fine that they were exported to other countries, forming the backbone of Iloilo's early economy. This vibrant industry gave Iloilo a unique identity. The city was not just a port but a center of artistry and craftsmanship. The clothes people wore, the sails on their boats, and the fabrics that decorated their homes were all products of local skill and creativity. The textile industry supported entire communities, providing a source of income and pride for thousands of families. It was a sustainable, homegrown economy where the artisans were respected members of society. This was the Iloilo of the loom, a city woven together by threads of tradition, community, and artistry. But this all changed with the arrival of the British and the opening of the port in 1855. Along with bringing in machinery for sugar mills, British traders also flooded the local market with cheap machine-made textiles from Manchester, England. These factory-produced fabrics were much less expensive than the hand-woven textiles of Iloilo. Suddenly, the local weavers found themselves in an impossible competition. Why would someone buy a more expensive handcrafted piece when a cheaper, imported alternative was readily available? The very same ships that carried Iloilo's sugar away returned with the threads that would unravel its weaving industry. The decline was devastating and swift. One by one, the looms fell silent. Families that had been weaving for generations lost their only source of income. The intricate skills and patterns that had been preserved for centuries were in danger of being lost forever. Artisans were forced to abandon their craft and seek other work, many ending up as low-wage laborers in the very sugar industry that was supplanting their way of life. The destruction of the textile industry was not just an economic loss, it was a cultural tragedy. A proud tradition was sacrificed at the altar of colonial trade and industrialization, leaving a deep wound in the city's soul. The title, La Muy Leal y Noble Ciudad, which was granted by the Spanish Queen Regent in 1896, was, presented as this great honor. On the surface, it really seemed like a reward for Iloilo's steadfast loyalty to Spain, especially at a time when rebellion was spreading in other parts of the Philippines. The Ilonggo elite, who had grown wealthy under the Spanish colonial system, just embraced this title with a lot of pride. It really affirmed their status and their close relationship with the colonial masters. For them, being most loyal and noble was kind of a validation of their economic and social dominance. They saw themselves as partners with Spain, sharing in the governance and prosperity of the region. But this royal recognition was not just a symbolic gesture, it was actually a brilliant act of political manipulation. By bestowing such a prestigious title, the Spanish authorities achieved several strategic goals. First, it deepened the alliance between the colonial government and the powerful Ilonggo Ilustrados and Hacenderos. These elites were given a stake in preserving Spanish rule, since their wealth and position basically depended on it. In return for their loyalty, they were given privileges and protection, creating a buffer class that stood between the Spanish and the masses. The crown was, in essence, kind of a bribe to keep the richest and most influential families on Spain's side. Second, the title was used to create a division among Filipinos. By celebrating Iloilo's loyalty, the Spanish were sending a clear message to the revolutionaries in Luzon and other regions: resistance is futile and foolish, while loyalty is rewarded with honor and prosperity. It was a classic divide-and-conquer strategy, really. Iloilo was held up as the model colony, an example of how Filipinos could, thrive by cooperating with Spain. This narrative helped to isolate the revolutionary movement, making them look like ungrateful troublemakers who were disrupting the peace and progress enjoyed by loyal subjects like the Ilonggos. But the highest price for this loyalty was actually paid by the ordinary people. While the elites celebrated their noble title, the common workers, farmers, and displaced artisans saw little of the proclaimed prosperity. Their labor fueled the economy, but they still remained trapped in poverty. The loyalty of Iloilo was really the loyalty of its ruling class, not necessarily the loyalty of its entire population. The Queen's title, therefore, was a deception. It masked a system of exploitation and reinforced a social hierarchy where a privileged few benefited at the expense of the vast majority. The crown was both a reward and a tool of control, binding the city's elite to a colonial power that oppressed their own countrymen. For years, the revolutionary spirit that had ignited Luzon seemed, pretty distant from Iloilo. The city's elite, bound by economic ties and royal honors to Spain, were hesitant to join the fight. But the tide of history is relentless. By 1898, the Spanish Empire was really crumbling. The Americans had defeated the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay, and revolutionary forces across the Philippines were gaining ground. The fire of revolution finally reached Panay Island, led by brave Ilonggos, like General Martin Delgado. The loyalty that Spain had so carefully cultivated began to fracture as the promise of freedom became a real possibility. A pivotal moment came on December 25, 1898. On Christmas Day, a day of supposed peace and celebration, the Spanish forces finally evacuated Iloilo. They could no longer hold the city against the advancing Filipino revolutionaries. As the Spanish flag was lowered for the last time, General Martin Delgado and his revolutionary army, the Ejército Libertador, marched triumphantly into the city. In the grand public space that is now Plaza Libertad, they raised the Philippine flag for the very first time over Iloilo. Can you imagine the emotion of that moment? It was a declaration of independence, a symbol of hope, and a powerful statement that Iloilo was finally joining the Filipino nation. However, this moment of triumph was, sadly, short-lived and tinged with tragedy. The revolutionaries knew that another foreign power, the United States, was waiting just across the water, ready to take Spain's place. The Ilonggos had not fought to simply exchange one colonial master for another. As American forces prepared to land and occupy the city, the revolutionary government made a heartbreaking decision. Rather than surrender their hard-won capital to the Americans, they chose to set it on fire. On February 11, 1899, large parts of Iloilo City were intentionally burned by its own defenders. This event, known as the Great Fire of Iloilo, was an act of defiant sacrifice. The flames that consumed the commercial district, the warehouses filled with sugar, and the beautiful buildings were a testament to the Ilonggo's fierce desire for genuine independence. They were willing to destroy the very symbols of their wealth, rather than let them fall into the hands of a new colonizer. This act of burning their own city was both a tragedy and a profound expression of resistance. It showed the world that the people of Iloilo valued freedom above all else, even above the prosperity that had once defined them. When the Americans first arrived, they presented themselves as friends, or amigos. They claimed they were there to help the Filipinos achieve freedom from Spain. Their official policy was one of benevolent assimilation, a term that suggested, a gentle and helpful guidance toward self-government. They promised education, infrastructure, and democracy. Many Ilonggos, weary of war and hopeful for a better future, were initially willing to give the Americans a chance. They saw the new schools, roads, and sanitation systems being built and thought that perhaps this new relationship could be different from the one they had with Spain. However, the mask of benevolence soon slipped, revealing the true face of a new master, or amo. The Filipino-American War erupted, and Iloilo became a key battleground. The same Ilonggo revolutionaries who had fought against the Spanish now found themselves fighting a new, more powerful enemy. The American military campaign was brutal. They established concentration camps, or reconcentration zones, where entire villages were forced to relocate. This was done to cut off support for the guerrilla fighters, but it resulted in widespread starvation, disease, and death among civilians. The promise of friendship had turned into the reality of violent conquest. Economically, the Americans continued and even deepened the exploitative system that Spain had established. American companies took control of the sugar trade, ensuring that the profits flowed primarily to the United States. While they built schools and taught English, this education was also a tool for cultural colonization, designed to create a generation of Filipinos who were more aligned with American values than their own. The political system they introduced gave the appearance of democracy, but ultimate power remained firmly in the hands of the American Governor-General. The Ilonggo elite once again adapted and collaborated with the new rulers to protect their own interests. The transition from Spanish to American rule was not a liberation, but a change of colonial management. The promise of benevolence was a thin veil for economic exploitation and political control. The Americans may have been more efficient and systematic in their approach, but their goal was the same: to use the Philippines for their own strategic and economic benefit. For the ordinary Ilonggo, the dream of true independence, which had burned so brightly in 1898, was once again deferred. The amigo had become the new amo, and the struggle for freedom had to continue in new and more subtle ways. The years of American rule were eventually shattered by the outbreak of World War II. On April 16, 1942, the Japanese Imperial Army invaded and occupied Iloilo. This marked the beginning of one of the darkest and most terrifying periods in the city's history. The initial bombing raids caused widespread panic and destruction, forcing thousands of residents to flee to the mountains and rural areas. The Japanese military established a harsh and brutal regime. The city that had once been a hub of commerce and culture was now a place of fear, scarcity, and oppression under the flag of the rising sun. Daily life for Ilonggos became a constant struggle for survival. Food was severely rationed and starvation became a grim reality. The Japanese military police, the Kempeitai, were notorious for their cruelty. Suspected guerrillas or sympathizers were arrested, tortured, and executed without trial. Fear was a constant companion. People had to bow to Japanese soldiers in the streets, and any sign of disrespect could lead to a violent beating or worse. The beautiful mansions of the sugar barons were commandeered to become offices and barracks for the occupying army. Their grandeur a stark contrast to the suffering of the people outside their walls. Despite the overwhelming danger, the spirit of resistance did not die. many Ilongos refused to surrender and took to the hills to form guerrilla units. These brave men and women, led by figures like Colonel Macario Peralta Jr., waged a relentless campaign of harassment and sabotage against the Japanese forces. They established a free government in the mountains, printed their own currency, and gathered intelligence for the Allied forces. These resistance fighters were supported by a network of civilians who risked their lives to provide them with food, medicine, and information. It was a silent shadow war fought by ordinary people who refused to be conquered. The Japanese retaliation for this resistance was swift and merciless. Entire villages suspected of supporting the guerrillas were burned to the ground and their inhabitants massacred. The war brought out the worst of humanity, but it also brought out the best. Stories of incredible bravery, sacrifice, and solidarity emerged from these dark times. When American forces finally returned to liberate Panay in March 1945, they found a city and a people that had been scarred by years of brutal occupation, but whose spirit remained unbroken. The experience of the war left a deep and lasting trauma on the Ilongo psyche, a painful memory of the price of freedom. After the devastation of World War II, Iloilo tried to rebuild itself. The city was liberated and the nation was finally granted independence in 1946. There was a sense of hope that Iloilo could reclaim its former glory as the Queen City of the South. However, the post-war years brought new challenges that would cause the city's glittering crown to slip. The old economic order built on sugar was becoming unstable. The world was changing, and Iloilo struggled to keep up. The foundation of its prosperity, which was already built on inequality, began to crack. One of the most significant developments was the rise of organized labor. The workers who had toiled for generations in the sugar fields and on the docks were no longer willing to accept the exploitative conditions of the past. Empowered by the post-war atmosphere of change and inspired by new ideologies, they began to form unions and demand better wages, fair treatment, and improved working conditions. The port of Iloilo, the very heart of its economy, became a hotbed of labor unrest. Strikes became common, paralyzing the shipment of sugar and other goods. The once smooth flow of wealth was now constantly disrupted by the demands of the workers who produced it. This labor unrest, combined with other economic factors, led many of the sugar barons and big businesses to look for alternatives. They found one in the neighboring island of Negros, where they could build new ports and mills, away from the powerful labor unions of Iloilo. Slowly but surely, the shipping and commerce that had been the lifeblood of Iloilo began to divert elsewhere. The sugar that was once loaded at the Iloilo port was now being shipped directly from Negros. The city's economy, which was so heavily dependent on its role as a regional trading hub, began to decline. As the money and business moved away, Iloilo entered a long period of economic stagnation. The once bustling port grew quiet. The grand mansions, once symbols of immense wealth, began to show their age, their maintenance too costly for families whose fortunes were fading. The title Queen City of the South started to sound more like a memory than a reality, as other cities like Cebu began to rise and claim that honor. The crown had slipped. This period of decline was painful, but it was also a necessary consequence of an economic system that had for too long ignored the rights and welfare of its working people. We have journeyed through the dark and complex history of Iloilo, from the bitter realities of the sugar boom to the fires of revolution and the hardships of war. These are not just stories from old books, they are the lived experiences of our ancestors. The history of Iloilo is not just in the grand mansions or the public plazas, it is alive within our own families waiting to be discovered. The past is personal, and it connects us to these epic events in ways we might not even realize. Every family has a story that is a small but vital piece of this larger puzzle. Think about your own family. Ask your grandparents, your aunt. Perhaps they can tell you about life during the Japanese occupation. They might remember the fear, the hunger, and the quiet acts of courage that were part of their everyday existence. Maybe they have a story about a relative who joined the guerrillas in the mountains. These personal memories make the history of the war real and immediate. They transform abstract historical facts into human experiences of suffering and resilience, helping us understand the true cost of the freedom we enjoy today. Perhaps your family has roots in the sugar industry. Ask them about the stories they heard from their own parents or grandparents. Were they who lived in one of the big houses, or were they who worked in the fields? What was life like for them? The stories of the wealthy might reveal the anxieties of maintaining a fortune, while the stories of the workers will speak of hardship, struggle, and the fight for dignity. Or maybe your ancestors were weavers, and your family still has an old piece of fabric tucked away, a silent reminder of a lost craft and a different way of life. By asking these questions and listening to these stories, we do something incredibly important. We rescue our history from being forgotten. We honor the experiences of those who came before us, their joys, their sorrows, their struggles, and their triumphs. This is how history becomes meaningful. It stops being a list of dates and names and becomes a living, breathing part of who we are. So I invite you and every Kapuso to become a historian of your own family. Talk to your elders, look at old photographs, and piece together your family's journey through the complex history of Iloilo. Your story is our history. Share it, preserve it, and let it teach us all.